And questions of high strangeness with Linda Moulton Howe. Up next, Conversations with Linda on Coast to Coast AM. And welcome back to Coast to Coast. I'm George Noory. We've got Linda Moulton Howe here. Your questions for her and also perhaps tips so she can run and do other stories. The lines are open. Linda, of all the things you've been investigating lately, anyone there the most perplexing for you?
Well, I think that what I'm going to be presenting in Las Vegas at Ryan's conference is about as provocative as anything I could investigate, and that is, what is the nature of these lights that back in Bentwaters in 1980, because of later hypnosis sessions by a couple of the men who were there, are sentences about the lights are speaking to us, the lights are pressuring us. And even the Adrian Bustinza, mysterious character, told John Burroughs that he felt the lights pushed him to the ground. What are these mysterious lights that have interacted with the minds of these many military people in that event in Bentwaters and left so many different pieces of a story, and that so many of them, at least two that I know specifically, feel today that they are trying hard to break through in a memory that has been blocked. And that's one of the people that I'm going to be focusing on in Las Vegas. And I think that it is one of the remarkable aspects of this phenomena, centuries of descriptions, and we're in the 21st century. The phenomenon continues. What keeps changing is that our awareness and sensitivity and consciousness about an openness now to other intelligences, time travelers even, other dimensional entities, is becoming something that is sticking, I think, with populations. And as that's occurring, more and more details that might have been almost unbearably incomprehensible 20 or 30 years ago are becoming something that everybody can speak about. And maybe, George, that means we're getting closer and closer to real truths that are outside of government control.
All right, let's go to the phone. Steve in Chicago, Illinois, east of the Rockies. You're on with Linda. Hey, Stephen.
Hey, good morning, George and Linda. Linda, you're one of my favorite guests. Your work is outstanding, and thank you for that.
Well, thank you.
I have a comment and a question. It makes me very angry, whether it be aliens or black ops military or corrupt government, that they think they have a right to pull people out of their homes and cars or wherever they may be and abduct them and hurt them according to their own agendas. It concerns me a little bit with this country swinging from the far right to the far left in terms of a threat to the Second Amendment, but that's another conversation. You made mention of this lady that was putting tinfoil up in her car to try to block.
It was Paul Benowitz. He was the physicist at the Thunder Mountain Lab right at the edge of Kirtland Air Force Base, quite famous to some of us who were studying animal mutilations and human abductions in the early 80s. And Paul Benowitz was the one who had J. Allen Hynek come down and see him and talk to him. And I talked with Hynek after that conversation. And Paul Benowitz was at the center of doing videotaping, or actually back then it was 8mm film of lights in the sky moving over Albuquerque that Paul Benowitz, physicist, went to Kirtland Air Force Base and said, I think that there are UFOs flying in the skies. And he tried to get the government's attention. Well, he apparently got the government's attention, but it was counterintelligence attention. And in the end, Paul Benowitz disintegrated into a man whose mind seemed to snap. He was not functioning very well toward the end of his life, and that all of this was brought on apparently by his trying to tell the government the facts of what he, as scientist, thought that he was recording over Albuquerque, New Mexico. He is the one that Leah Sprinkle was called by to come down and deal with the mother and the son, and it was Paul Benowitz who told Leo that to protect them from interference by the non-humans, that they would have to do the hypnosis session in a car with tinfoil put all over the ceiling of the car to reflect out microwave frequencies.
Right. And I think that should be a priority with if you have any experience with other abductees, is in their experience, what have they done to defeat this apparent mind control that they have over people, to take control of them and to monitor them transparently wherever they are. I don't know if there's any people that have any ideas on how to defeat that technology or whatever technique they're using to do that, but I think that could be very important.
Well, it's a very good question and very relevant to a discussion that I had yesterday with a person who is based in New York City and has had a life, and his brother has had a life of interaction with what he would classify as non-human entities. And I think more and more people are saying non-human because we don't know if they are time travelers, other dimensional, or from a solar system somewhere in this galaxy or this universe. But nevertheless, he described an amazing situation in which something sort of in the gray category comes into his room, and he has the experience of waking up, staring at it, not being afraid, and then hearing telepathically in the human male head, that the being is saying, uh-oh, something's wrong. He sees us, and he's not afraid. And he said, maybe that's what humans need, is encouragement to not be afraid and to use your own mind to resist telepathic thoughts.
Let's go to David in Crawford, Colorado, west of the Rockies. You're on with Linda Moulton Howe. Hey, David.
Aloha, George. Aloha, Linda and Nick. It's kind of strange sounding aloha from Colorado, but I moved over here. Anyways, I've never been so nervous, or you might say scared.
Why?
I got an offer for Linda, 1957. I'm just going to be real brief with this. If she wants, she can call me back, and I can give her my number.
Okay.
Sure.
They talk about these things enticing children, and I was about 5 years old, and I had this experience with a dog down in my dad's pasture. Beautiful, long-haired, looked like a wolf, blue-eyed, looked like an inside dog, very clean. And I played with this dog for 3 days, and on the third day, I remember because I had to come home from school and put my books away and run down the pasture to see if I could find this dog again for 3 days. And on the third day, I looked up in the sky, and I saw this eye looking out at me. And I've spoken to George about the triangle thing with the circles in the corners.
Yes, I remember that.
A friend of mine just several months ago, I was discussing this with him, and he said it was a cloudy day, Dave. The cloud hid out the rest of the triangle, and what you're looking at was the corner sticking out of the cloud with the circles. You know, if you draw it,
right.
You know what I'm saying?
I do.
So, I don't know. But I had a theory. So if you wanted to talk to me about that, I'd talk to you about it off air.
Well, or do you have a computer? Can you?
No, that's the problem. I told Tom I'm computer illiterate. I don't have a computer.
Okay, well, he can then give me your phone number, but I can, as I listened to you, the first thing that came into my mind was the book, The Skinwalker, having to do with that ranch in Utah.
The one that George Knapp has done some work on?
Yes, and the book opens with this extraordinary event in which blue-eyed, wolf-looking large dogs suddenly come running at the owners of the ranch. It's very dramatic. And it ties also into cryptozoology and Stan Gordon's work in this sense. What are these black panthers that people swear up and down, not only in the United States, but England, all over the world, that they see black panthers, they see blue-eyed, huge, massive dogs, they see all kinds of creatures, insist that they are blood and flesh, and yet, like the man who shot at the Sasquatch Bigfoot in Great Falls, Montana back in 1975, the creature disappeared in a flash of light. I have seen that law enforcement report from the Cascade County Sheriff's Office with those words typed, disappeared in a flash of light. These creatures, even the Thunderbird fits into this category. For people who see it, as far as they're concerned, they are looking at flesh and blood, some kind of a creature that they can only compare to pterodactyls or the Sumerian Anzu.
Mm-hmm.
And that's now. This is in 2008. Well, what are these creatures? What was the blue-eyed dog when you were 5 years old, really? And when you go to the work of people who have been investigators in the abduction syndrome, there are so many descriptions of the owl, the deer at the edge of the fence, all of these animals that suddenly seem to be like screen memories for something that's not a deer, not an owl, not a blue-eyed dog, to interface with humans.
David, we're going to get your number, and we'll pass it on to Linda for you. Linda, give us any brief updates environmentally. What's going on in that arena?
Well, I'll tell you, in October, starting from the first week up till now, I began pulling new data that was coming into the science journals and various things and realized that my file in just 3 weeks was expanding about as thickly as I have ever had, like a fresh file of just new reports. And it is so extensive now how much data is coming in to so many different scientific investigations that seem to be supporting, and this is perhaps the most astonishing bottom line of dozens and dozens of stories, that not only in October did scientists report that the fall temperatures in the Arctic broke all record highs of all time, averaging 5 degrees Celsius above normal, which is 41 degrees Fahrenheit above normal in the Arctic, but that all of this Arctic warming is causing already measurable sea level rise in that area, and they know that the fresh water that is now pouring into the North Atlantic, or has been from the summer into the fall, is going to have an impact on that, what's called the North Atlantic drift or oscillation that has kept the UK and Europe warm for so long, bringing equatorial water up into that area. And the big, huge irony of all this is that as global warming is going forward,
for whatever reason, yes,
we won't even try to call what scientists say, which is industrial emissions, but let's say we are definitely in a time, and here is this headline that I was stressing, the Hadley Computer Lab Center in Great Britain's Meteorological Office warned in October this month that unless global greenhouse gas emissions start reducing 3% a year beginning in 2010, which is only 2 years from now, the average global mean temperature of Earth will definitely rise by at least 4 degrees Fahrenheit over the next 90 years. And, George, that's 4 times the rate of global warming in the 20th century. And a 4 degrees Fahrenheit rise, that's the tipping point that scientists have been discussing, where the computer models forecast serious sea level rise measured in feet, not centimeters, and we're talking about the very century that we are living in. And the consequences of all this, as you take this file of all of these new science reports that are coming in, and it ranges from everything from the penguins in Antarctica, that 75% of the Adélie penguins and 50% of those magnificent emperor penguins could be gone this century. And here is another shocker. Some computer models, now taking all current data in, show that if the current rate of greenhouse gas buildup is not reduced, that 3.6 degrees Fahrenheit or 2 degrees Celsius global warming could be reached as an average global temperature by 2050, and that's only 4 decades from now. It used to be, it's off at the turn of the 21st to the 22nd century. We're at the end of 2008. We're talking about computer model projections now that could have that kind of 4 times the last century warming in just 40 more years. And what happens to the weather? What happens to too much water in some parts of the planet, too much drought in the other parts of the planet? And when people say, well, isn't it forecast that we're going to have a very cold, snowy winter? That is just part of the entire projection of what happens when you have global warming increases. You have bigger pendulum swings in the weather. And in fact, Discover magazine in the November 2008 issue has an astonishing number in this time in which we're seeing trillions on CNBC Business Network about what's happening with banks and financial institutions. Well, here is a huge, huge number that comes from Discover magazine having to do with engineering Earth to stop climate change. This is the November 2008 article. According to the Natural Resources Defense Council, the projected cost of climate change worldwide in another 90 years, if nothing is done to reduce the current greenhouse gas emissions and the buildup, will cost at least $1,873 billion. And, George, what's going to eat up over $1 trillion in these 90 years? More erratic weather with flooding, drought, severe tornadoes, and hurricanes, because that is a consequence of global warming. No matter how you cut it, it doesn't matter what the source is. The data, the hard data is, these numbers are real. They're based on real measurements. And it has gotten to the point, this is amazing to me. I have interviewed Wally Broecker at NOAA's Goddard Institute for Space Studies maybe half a dozen times in just the last 6 or 7 years. He is one of the major minds having to do with what goes on between the waters of the world and the atmosphere. And he is so concerned that Professor Broecker is now proposing that somebody somehow create building, and here's the quote, 60 million 50-foot high towers to capture all the world's carbon emissions that can then be pumped into saline aquifers for storage. That's coming from a first-class scientist. And it goes all the way to Nobel laureate and atmospheric chemist Paul Crutzen. He got this idea from Mount Pinatubo when it blasted off in 1991, and it blew 20 million tons of sulfur dioxide into the atmosphere. And the Earth did cool down from that volcano back in 91, 92, 93 for quite a while. Well, he, Nobel laureate, atmospheric chemist Paul Crutzen, has this idea that we could shoot 5.3 million tons of sulfur dioxide into the atmosphere every year in order to keep CO2 emissions from doubling.
Jeez. Stay with us. We'll be back in a moment. We will take final phone calls with Linda, as well as, Linda, I want you to give me an update if you know what astronomer Chandra Wickramasinghe is up to with that red rain he was investigating. I'm going to be taking tomorrow night off, one of those rare days where toward the end of the year you got to eat up a few vacation days or they're gone, even though I give up about 9 a year. Whitley Strieber sitting in for me, so you get a dose of Whitley on tomorrow's Coast to Coast show. We'll be right back with Linda and the rest of your calls on Coast to Coast AM. Okay, let's go to Columbus, Ohio. Tim, you're on with Linda Moulton Howe. Hi, Tim.
Hi, how are you?
Great.
Hi, George. Hi, Linda. I just wanted to call and ask Linda a question. I've been driving truck for about 6 months. I just started listening to the program about that time. Last night at about this same time, I was driving on Route 11, not far from the area that she's been speaking about in the Pennsylvania, Ohio, West Virginia area.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And there were about 6 cars pulled off alongside the road for about a 2-mile stretch, and there's people outside the cars looking up, and I started to look up, and I noticed something in the air that was a very bright object. It didn't look like any kind of aircraft or anything like that. It almost looked like an animal kind of floating, but it was extremely bright. It was almost putting off its own light. And I looked above that, and it seemed like a triangular pattern. It looked, at first I thought, well, maybe something's giving chase to this, but then as I noticed it, the whole triangular pattern shifted to its side, and whatever this bright object that was going up lit the bottom side of it, and this thing was gigantic. I can't even fathom how big this thing was. It was huge.
Wow.
Now, at first I thought to discount it as the Pittsburgh airport is not very far from there, but whenever I saw the bottom of it light up, I don't know what it was, and there was at least 6 or 7 other people or groups of people that saw this same thing. I was wondering if this is something that you have had reports of, this shape and size of an object, and I was just wondering if you've heard anything about this in this area before.
Well, I'm really glad that you have called in and described this, because this is a perfect case. If we have Pittsburgh and that region listeners on Coast tonight who might know anything about this, if you would please get in touch with me at earthfiles@earthfiles.com. And one thing that would be very helpful, do you think that you could email me a sketch with colored pencils of what you saw? And if others could do the same thing who are listening, then we have some comparison point, because sometimes when these kinds of dramatic things happen in an area that is famous for these unusual appearances, they will repeat. I'm not guaranteeing it, but sometimes that occurs. And right now, if we could get a signal out to that area, can you give you remember the road itself, the crossing, how many miles from some place that everybody listening might know?
Absolutely. I was on Route 11. I was near East Liverpool, Ohio, which is just on the other side of the Ohio River. I could actually see the Ohio River on my left-hand side. I tried to slow down enough where I could actually get a really good look. I wanted to get out and take a picture with my camera phone, but it was unsafe for me to pull over in a semi. I don't know, maybe if somebody else has, like you said, to get the word out. But I tried to pull over, and it's kind of a mountainous, hilly area, and by the time I got around a curve where I could slow down and maybe stop, I couldn't see the object anymore. So it must have been not too high above the tree line. I'm going to imagine that it was at least a couple hundred feet, more than that probably, maybe a couple thousand feet, but it was low enough to where whatever that object was, which looked, that's the strange thing that caught my eye in the first place, it looked like some kind of, like a large animal or something getting, it was completely brilliant with light though. I mean, 100% it was lit up, almost like if you would take a spotlight up, but it was in the shape of something. And I don't know what it is. I can't place it in my head what it could possibly be the shape of. But
the animal that you thought it was the shape of was inside of a triangular shaped object that was very large?
It was heading up towards that. It wasn't inside of it. It was heading towards it, and whatever the brilliant light from that object was that was down below, it seemed as it came up that it lit the bottom side, and it seemed like it was slate gray with no features at all on it. But these lights that were on each corner of it, they were flashing in a way that I haven't seen conventional aircraft go. It was like a flittering kind of light, but it was all in the same sequence. It wasn't like the ebb and flow of a star. It was, each one of these had, they were in conjunction with one another, and that's what really struck me. That's why I thought at first, well, these are aircraft that are coming along and looking at this bright object that's down below. And I can't really wrap my head around what this is. I'm not really a believer in that kind of thing, but this kind of, it really changed my mind.
Well, this is so important. If you could draw with colored pencils to the best of your ability what you saw, and if anybody listening saw this last night and could also send me drawings, I think it would be so helpful. And as you're describing the lights that you saw, I'm thinking again of John Keel's book about the Mothman prophecy in West Virginia, where everybody said that the lights that showed up for that 13 months of all of the high strangeness, they referred to them as prismatic, as if they contained all of the colors as you would see in a prism, but they were pulsing.
Let's go to Spartanburg, South Carolina, Linda. William is waiting for you. Hey, William, go ahead.
Hey, I think I know of a way to stop the telepathic attacks, or at least the mind control that some people refer to of the Greys.
How?
Mind control, telepathy, all of that is a two-way street. There's no one side to it. So with these Greys, all you have to do is think back. You can think back gently, or you can think back harshly, aggressively, because they're logical beings and they don't like aggression. They don't like anger and rage because they're trying to keep their little hive mind thing going. When you pump all that aggression and anger at them, it disorients and discombobulates them.
Have you saying this from your own firsthand experience with them close up?
Well, no, not necessarily. I've studied telepathy as best I can, and all the things point to the fact that it has to be a two-way street. You just can't go inside somebody's mind and start implanting things telepathically without having to have your mind open in order to push it in. Like I said, it's a two-way street. Now, you have to realize that there is a risk when you open your mind up and push back. You're opening the door a little wider than usual, and that can have side effects. But if you don't want them inside your head messing with you, you have to take that chance.
And you're saying to make your mind focus on a kind of aggression or anger toward them to make them back off.
Yes, or you can be nice and gentle. You know, they're logical beings. They have something of a hive mind when they work together during abduction. And this helps them know what's going on the ship and with the person who's been abducted. But in order to have that hive mindset, they can't have a lot of emotion going on in between each other. So they have to suppress their emotions. That's where your mind comes in. We're illogical creatures by nature.
Well, I can give a footnote that I can't prove, but I've always thought of it as very, very important. This goes back somewhere in the 80s, and I was told by a man who had worked in the military that our government was very concerned about the retaliation of the non-human entities against our pilots and machinery and computers and radar, and that we had a program. The one that was being described to me was based in Hawaii in a military setting in which they were trying to train a certain group of pilots to resist telepathic intrusions into their mind so that they could not be taken over by the non-human forces that we are dealing with in some sort of a very complex chess game. And he said that there was a pilot who was flying in formation with other pilots, and he suddenly said on the radio, I think that something is trying to get me. And they encouraged him to use their mental training, and he said he resisted it, and he was able to land. It doesn't prove, I can't prove any of this. It was said to me, but if there is truth in this, it means that our government for decades has been trying to counteract telepathic mind interaction with non-humans.
What's new with astronomer Chandra Wickramasinghe and his investigation of that red rain?
He did retire full-time, and it is left to Dr. Chandra in India, who the last time when I had him in an interview on Coast, he said that the next step would be a full formal publishing in a science journal, and that he promised that he would let me know if this was occurring. And he has not contacted me about a journal, and I have not heard of anything more published. He's had a tremendous difficulty convincing science journals, the editors of science journals, to treat this as anything beyond red-colored yeast.
Yeah, they won't pick it up, will they?
No, and that's part of this problem, and I find it fascinating. He's convinced that it is some kind of strange cell for sure, but unless he can get it published in a scientific journal that is vetted by other scientists, it sort of hangs out there as unsupported by current Earth science.
Let's go to El Paso, Texas. Eddie, take it away. Go ahead, Eddie.
Thanks, George. Appreciate it.
Sure
I'd like to ask Linda a little question.
Mm-hmm.
And also, from Machuco, aquí estoy, canal. David, I guess he was out there. But I was wanting to ask about energy work and how that could play a part within oneself and to change or envision what we are feeling inside, as many of us are.
I think what you mean is that if you can meditate and focus on either light or something that might affect the frequency of the body, that it might strengthen the mind-body-spirit complex. So when it is in the presence of something that might be non-human, it might be able to stand on its own 2 feet better.
G in one?
I'm sorry, one more time, Eddie.
Are we all energy in one? So why would it be non-human if energy is within all of us?
Oh, I see. From the Bell's theorem point,
Exactly.
light throughout the universe is all connected. Well,
And going even with like Deepak Chopra.
Yes, and I think that is the paradox that still kind of overwhelms people when they realize that my atoms, your atoms, the atoms of the sun, all of the stars from one end of the universe to the other, that all of the atoms are somehow connected, that certainly light seems to have a fabric that goes from one end of the universe to the other that is all connected. And if so, how could we be so divided and warring and fighting and destructive? I'm talking about a large philosophical issue if we are all one. And I don't have an answer to that, but I think that's what you're posing.
Not opposing, but that is the beauty of when we breathe in and breathing out. And like George is, there are no coincidences, no accident. So that is the beauty of it, and that's where I'm going with the spirituality of it, and being non-denominational.
Well, let me just pose to you that on this one humble planet, in this Milky Way galaxy, of which there are trillions of galaxies in this universe, there are hundreds of thousands of species of life forms, plants, insects, and animals. And for whatever the reason, most of these life forms must survive by eating other life forms. And when you come to the human level, the degree of violence in the name of all kinds of conflict seems to be the dominant theme. Why would that be? Why would we be on a planet where creatures to survive must eat other creatures? And again, these are kind of philosophical paradoxes that I think this universe presents us at so many levels, because if Bell's theorem is correct, if all photons are connected, if all of us are one, why is everything so lowered down to conflict, war, and all of these competing species? That would include non-humans. Non-humans would fall into the category of others with their own agendas using the earth.
Let's go to one or two more calls. We'll go to Houston. Rick in Texas. Go ahead there, Rick.
Yes, sir. George, very nice to talk to you. And
Sure
Linda,
thing.
what a pleasure.
Thank you.
I had a subject that I came across last week on the TV on that International History Channel.
Mm-hmm.
They were talking about these interdimensional creatures that are called rods. Do you know anything about that?
A little bit. I know that this has been I guess you would say, a kind of subset of unidentified flying objects for quite some time. And I've seen a lot of the photos. I do not understand what these rod things could be, but I think you set it up probably as appropriately as any. If there are other dimensional technologies or entities that can come in and out of our dimension through, let's say, collapsing magnetic fields has been postulated, then they might represent something that is not within this particular universe, but are something from a parallel universe or a parallel time that periodically comes in and out of here, or they are some kind of perhaps data gathering technology by maybe blondes or grays or reptilians or whatever the menagerie is in this universe that interacts with other planets, and that there's something about the way they are designed to not be seen easily in the visible spectrum by human eyes. And I don't know the answers to any of these questions, and I don't know anyone who really does, except that they are photographed so much that there has to be something that is going on of what we'll call a physical nature to end up on all these images.
Linda, we're rapidly running out of time. EarthFiles.com. Look forward to our program in Las Vegas.
Oh, yes.
It's going to be fun.
It is.
Got a good group of people there. And, of course, you remember the old saying, Linda, what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas.
Well, hopefully what we're going to be doing in the radio program and the conference is something that should be disseminated from Vegas. Help open mind.
You got it. Take care, Linda. I'll see you in a couple of weeks.
All right. Thank you.
That's Linda Moulton Howe. She'll be out there in Las Vegas along with a number of other major guests. I think you're going to enjoy that program when we have it that day. That's Friday night, November 7th, live in Las Vegas. Taking tomorrow night off, Whitley Strieber sitting in for me. I'll see you back on Monday. For Kara Coburn, Dan Galante, Tom Danheiser, Lisa Lyon, Lex Lonehood, Sean Ladesseur, Ross Mitchell, George Nappy, and Punit and Art Bell. I'm George Norrie, somewhere out there on Coast to Coast AM. I'll see you on our next edition. Until then, be safe, everyone.